Hello, I'm moderating a panel of writers and readers who want to talk all about beta reading. So say hello to Arena, Lio, and Skeptic. Why don't you introduce yourselves and tell us your connection with beta reading? Arena?
So I'll start us off.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Arena. I'm a 25-year-old book blogger and a techie. I'm currently pursuing a degree in multimedia engineering, while also book blogging and beta and sensitivity reading. I started beta reading because reading has always been a big passion of mine. And yeah, when I started book blogging, I started becoming involved in the community. And since then, I became addicted, so to speak.
Hi, I'm Lio Lylark. I am a writer, actor, and beta reader. And I've been beta reading in reading groups for scripts for about 5 years, and then for novels and short stories for about 2 consistently. And I really started beta reading as part of like sharing my writing, the sort of collaborative nature of getting feedback. And I really fell in love with the way that you can see a book at a really early stage of development and see where some of like the gems of it are, like what things are going to shine when the book is finally ready to be published, and what things you can offer the author to help them make it stronger.
My name is Skeptic Arthfrind. I'm a 39-year-old tea drinker and a hopeless video game addict. I've spent about 15 years in marketing and crisis public relations, and have moved over into just the copywriting space, where I coach budding writers with story ideas.
All right. Lio, for viewers who may not be familiar, what is beta reading and why is it important?
Okay. Beta reading is essentially when you have a story that is edited to a certain degree, but has not been seen by another person, generally. So a beta reader is someone who will usually give you the perspective of how a reader views your story. So they're not necessarily going to give you writing advice, but what they will do is look over the story that you've created, tell you what things are confusing, what things are working really well, what things aren't working. And it's important to have a beta reader, especially for a longer piece, because as the writer, you don't necessarily have the perspective. Things make sense in your head, but they may not necessarily translate to a reader. So having preferably more than one, having, 4 or 5 or 6 different people who look at it and tell you, hey, I'm really confused about this, can give you a good sense of how a reader is going to pursue, or is going to, how a reader is going to perceive your story. And it can be helpful to have multiple, because if you have one beta reader and they're like, I really don't understand the main character's motivations, then that might be one person. That might just be like their particular taste. But if you have 5 beta readers and 4 of them are confused, then you might need to look at rewriting or even changing the motivation so that it makes more sense.
For me, beta reading is anything that isn't quite ready to be queried. So if you're looking to workshop an idea, or if you're uncertain of an approach you're making, hey, experiment with a few things. Like Lio just said, toss it over to someone to give you feedback. In my experience, there's 2 kinds of feedback. There's mechanical feedback, which is the syntax, the grammar of writing your language. And then there's story structure. Do characters make sense? Does the plot work? Does this follow the 3, 4, or 5 act structure?
Yeah, I'm gonna give more of the perspective as a reader, not so much as a writer, because I'm not one. Basically, I see beta reading as straightforward, honest feedback about, like Skeptic said, the mechanical and the not so mechanical aspects of the story. So it's sort of an essential combination of the two that makes that feedback so important, because I think it's the first contact that your story has with an audience. So hopefully that really helps you understand if and what you need to sharpen in your story to make it exactly the story that you want to tell.
All right. New writers tend to have trust issues. I think we've all been there, right? So, what would you tell a writer who has concerns that a beta reader may take their idea or manuscript and use it as their own? Skeptic, what are your thoughts?
For the people who are super concerned about protecting their own ideas, and you can draft up a simple agreement like, hey, I trust you to not take any of these ideas, or at least not take this idea, this story as I've laid it out, and run with it as your own, and expect them to send an email back saying I agree. That's a kind of formless but still legally binding contract. You are protected in that case. When I first started doing the writing, I was actually very upset about this, and I did this. I found that turned a lot of people off, and most people won't do this. They will see something you did, like a nugget, a fraction of something you did, and go, I could do that in my story. But that's if they're a critique partner, which we'll touch on later. I want to point out, though, that there are only like a handful of original story ideas. Like Hamlet's been done, Macbeth has been done. Everyone always complains that Hollywood only produces like the same 10, 20 movies every year, and maybe they do. But it is always in that how they do it, how they twist genres and trope and conventions, that really, if you're that concerned that your beta reader might take your idea, don't give it out.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because ultimately it's always a risk, right? You can't for sure say it's not going to happen, or some things are just out of your control, even as a writer. But I think that the things that you can control are actually pretty easy, so to speak. That, for example, research, I think in this case, research is really important, and it's going to sound a bit creepy, but research in the sense that you can know more things about the beta reader that you're trying to work with. So, for example, because I see a lot of people that are doing beta reading or are already part of the community, the writing community. So don't be afraid to connect before you actually decide if you want to work with them. And like skeptics say, just binding legal contracts are also an option. So a good beta reader will not look badly on that. They will actually be available to sign anything that makes you more comfortable with protecting your rights as a writer. So yeah, there are steps that you can take, and a good beta reader should make you feel comfortable with taking those steps to protect yourself.
Yeah, and I just want to, as a writer, when I think about how much work it would be for me to try and steal and publish someone else's novel, like, first of all, I'd have to find one that like is almost ready. And most novels at beta level are not finished. It's not a reflection on the quality of the writer. It's just, this is an unfinished work. So I would have to know how to edit it properly. I'd have to be able to ghostwrite well enough that my edits don't show up as obviously not the original author's. I would have to find an agent and do the whole querying process. I would have to, or if I'm going to self-publish, put in the massive amount of money and time and energy it takes to self-publish. And I would do all of that in order to almost guaranteed make less money than I'd make putting the Hunger Games online. So as a scam, it just isn't very profitable, and it's a lot of work. And for someone to pull it off to the point that they would need to, they would have to be a better writer than most, because not only do you have to find this writing and know how to improve it and know how to edit it, but you have to be able to match the tone. And those are completely separate writing skills. So a lot of times when someone, it's fine to be concerned, but a lot of times when someone is very is convinced that I am going to run off and steal their novel, I kind of assume that that comes from not really understanding how difficult that would be for me to do. And I feel like I would love to have someone take an idea I have, write a book extremely similar to mine and make $1 million, because I need the comp titles. Please, someone make a fortune writing a book very similar to mine so I can query editors and be like, my book is this, but with snakes, and have a much easier time getting published.
Yeah, I think you raised a great point that it made me think that perhaps the pressure when you're both a beta reader and a writer is bigger on that end, because you're a writer, people will assume that you might, their property might be more at risk, so there's more pressure on you to assure the security, whereas as just a reader, there's not that much of a pressure, so to speak.
I wanted to share this real quick. So I coach people who want to pitch story ideas, and I had this guy who he pitched something that's an already existing Japanese anime, and I told him, like, go back to your drawing board. He comes at me again with a different Japanese anime, but more obscure. But I actually jokes on him, I actually liked that show. So what I told him to do was, for every day for a week, come up with 2 shows. It's something that exists crossed with something else that exists, and understand and give yourself permission to just, each idea is going to be bad, and out of 100 ideas, 1 might be worth pursuing, or 10, I don't know, and of those 10 that are worth pursuing, 1 might actually turn out to be a good novel. He came up with one that was, now mind you, when I was giving him examples, I was saying, like, Romeo and Juliet meets Sword in the Stone, Macbeth meets 1930s gangster. No, stop, you don't get to have that one. I'm going to use that. That's fire. He came up with, and I promise this is real, Sleeping Beauty meets The Blacklist. And I'm waiting for him to get his outline done so I can understand, like, where he's going. But, like, man, I want that idea. I'm not going to do it, but I want it.
All right. So I've seen this discussion on social media multiple times, so I'm interested to hear what all of you have to say. Lio, should writers pay for a beta reader?
I would say generally you're not going to pay for a beta reader unless they are performing other editorial services. One example where I would say this isn't strictly speaking beta reading, but it is very common for this to be a paid thing, and sometimes people think that it's not, is sensitivity and diversity reading. And what that is it's not quite beta reading, it's a bit more editorial than that, but it's someone who is from a community, particularly a marginalized community, and has a lot of experience and knowledge about that community. They can help you figure out how to portray that community accurately in your own work and judge how you've done it. So for example, if you want to write a book about a deaf main character or a deaf major character, and you yourself are not deaf or hard of hearing, you might hire a sensitivity reader who is deaf, who's part of the community, who understands the issues and what the experience is like. And they will tell you, this part is problematic, or this part isn't quite accurate to how we would do this, particular action. And the reason that you will generally pay for a sensitivity reader is because you are paying for not only their expertise, but the time and attention that they're giving to reading portrayals of their own community that are not necessarily always fun to read. And that can be very taxing and challenging. And so that is a service that you would be more likely to pay for. But generally, if it's if it's just someone who's going to be like reading your story for you and giving you feedback, it's very common for that to be free or like in exchange for also like looking at their work.
We're going to touch on the difference between a beta reader and a critique partner a little later, but I've paid for a beta reader and I've paid for a critique partner. And I'll tell you, never pay for a beta reader. Never, ever. There is nothing a beta reader can offer you that has the value of what a professional editor can tell you. And the professional editor will tell you better, in a more professional way every time. My paid beta reader experience was lackluster. I got she looked at 45,000 words. She gave me 3 paragraphs. That was $100. Like, I don't mind telling you all that I blew $100 needlessly. Never do it. And by the way, all the beta reading you can find in the writing community is worth, like, it's free, and it's the highest value you'll get for free. Some of the highest value you can get for free that I've seen in a while.
Yeah, I just want to say, sorry you had that experience, Skeptic. Yeah, kind of going on the opposite side here. I do beta reading, and currently I only do paid beta reading for several reasons. But at the end of the day, I don't think one can really say if you should or you shouldn't pay for a beta reader. It's really a question of your needs and if you can or can't pay. That's also something to consider. But I personally do pay beta reading right now because I'm at a time of my life in my work that I feel like my being paid for my services allows me to continue doing them. And also at the point of where I am with my work, how I've worked to get to the point where I am, I feel like getting paid for that work is really what allows me to continue honing my craft, so to speak. But yeah, like Skeptic said, there's a lot of free beta reading. There are also a lot of paid beta readers out there. So whatever you feel comfortable with, and just do it, and just find the one for you, whether it's paid or free. You're the one who's building your boundaries. So choose.
I know I'm just the moderator, but I'd like to say something if I could, just because I had an experience recently with a beta reader who did it for free, but they did such a great job. And it is so hard to find a beta reader that does such a great job. But when you find that person, I would totally pay them for it. Because then I know that they're going to do a good job. Now, unfortunately, Skeptic's experience sounded just the opposite, where you're like, well, I'm paying someone, I'm expecting them to do a good job because I'm paying for them. And then you get some of the comments that you get from even free ones, where they're just like, it was okay. And that's it. I very much like the reader experience line by line. I mean, maybe not exactly line by line, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So there are times I would definitely pay for it if I knew for sure they were going to give me the kind of stuff I wanted, and not just like good comments that sound, that make me feel good. I have to hear the I have to hear the criticism to be able to learn how to be a better writer. So
I will tack on that I have tipped people that I thought gave me particularly insightful help, or if I said, hey, I'm desperate for feedback on this very narrow aspect of something, I've tossed $15-20, which was more than worth their time. But I'm not walking back what I said, but if there's this line from The Dark Knight that's standing out: if you're good at something, never do it for free.
right.
Yeah.
Well, Skeptic had, go ahead, Arena.
No, yeah, I just want to say that I think it's a really complex issue, but it's an interesting discussion that ultimately comes down to the quality of the beta reading. Just like you said, if it's such a good beta reading that you don't mind paying for, because you appreciate the work and value. Not that money is the only way to express value, of course, but it all comes down to the experience and the amount of work the beta reader is willing to do. And if they're great, also your personal relationship with money, it's a very complex issue, but the quality is the most important part.
Yeah, Skeptic had mentioned this briefly before, but beta readers and critique partners both give feedback on a manuscript. So Skeptic, yes, please tell us, in what ways can these two differ?
So a beta reader at their core are just passionate readers. Their job is to read the manuscript, give you broad stroke feedback, usually in one round. You can work with them again if you want, if they're willing, if you're willing, but it's a more transactional relationship. Some betas will get specific, some will offer very like zoomed 30,000 foot levels reaction of your stuff. And beta readers expect some reciprocity sometimes. It's actually the timing of this panel is very fortunate. Author Carol Beth Anderson released a book about beta reading and alpha reading and how to be good at it, and where to find, like for authors, where to find them, for those who are doing it, how to be good at it. A critique partner, however, is different. Critique partner is more that nuanced, mechanical, and critique partners are always writers, whereas beta readers can be people who can really enjoy reading books. I would prefer finding a critique partner, because more often than not, I'm getting people who have sat through advice sessions, feedback sessions that are just, this was good, I liked it, end of list. Critique partners know you're looking for that, why is it good? Critique partners don't miss deadlines. Typically, in my experience, though mileage varies here, critique partners are paid. Liz Cartwright, yeah, shout out to Liz Cartwright over in the United Kingdom, who just offers this amazing package, and she offers very detailed manuscript critiques. But it's about scenes and the mechanics and everything a budding author could hope for. Beta reading, I'm not out here to insult beta readers, but beta reading always falls short of critique partnering. I say that I'm currently mostly a beta reader. I don't really do critique partnering for other people.
I will say that critique partnering does tend to have more specific feedback on like beats of story in a way that a beta reader might or might not. It's kind of, you kind of need to gauge like with your beta reader, like how much they tend to give in terms of feedback and how much you're actually looking for. But I think one value of having a beta reader, especially one who is just a reader, is that I think sometimes writers have different perspectives on stories than readers do. And while a writer's perspective can be really valuable and can be very specific, like sometimes as a writer, I'll see something that if I wasn't writing personally, I might not necessarily notice, or I might not necessarily know why I feel that way. But a reader, I think, sometimes can have less, I don't want to say ego, that's probably too hard a word, but like, because they're just a reader and they love the experience of reading, they're not necessarily thinking about it in exactly the same way that a writer would. So I think that there are values to both sides, although critique partners do tend to have a little bit, generally, if you have a critique partner, they're going to give a lot of advice and a lot of feedback, whereas a beta reader might or might not. So if you for sure want like a ton of feedback and you're willing to work on someone else's work in return, a critique partner might be the best choice for you.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add in this discussion because I only have the beta reading perspective, not the critique partner perspective, but it seems to me like critique partners are more craft oriented, so to speak, just like Lio was saying. But yeah, it's interesting to get this perspective from the writers, so I can also know the differences and how to bring them into my work.
I can see how how people would wear different hats based on what they're doing. So if like I'm beta reading, I'm probably going to comment more about my experience as a reader, like, ooh, you know, I really like this character or something like that. Whereas as a critique partner or an editor, I might, you know, focus more on the character arc or something of the structural nature of it as well. So yes, I can definitely see what you guys are talking about there. Arena, when writers are looking for beta readers, where can they find them?
I'm going to give a very basic answer, but one I think is actually the central. Just Google it, because you can find anything on Google these days, and finding beta is pretty easy. When I first started out, I was actually researching the market so I could set up my own page and everything, and I just Googled a lot. Even if you go on Twitter and just write beta reader in the search box, you'll find a lot of people with it on their profiles, so on their bio, excuse me. So yeah, they're pretty easy to find, and don't be afraid to research for companies that can help you find a better reader through their own websites, which normally is pretty easy.
I do agree. And I think you can also, if you go to in-person like writing circles, when that's safe and available for you to do so in your area, that can be a really great way to see which writers you kind of gel with and which ones you, really value their feedback, and you could potentially ask them to beta read for you. Or there are groups. When it's online groups, you want to be a little bit more selective, a little bit more careful, just because you don't know the person. So you might not mesh with them as well as someone that you like know and can like read a lot about. But there are a lot of places to find beta readers.
I've been surprised as the number of places. I'm chiefly on Twitter, and the writing community on Twitter is expensive. And if you're dedicated and you can get through the initial attitude of, well, no one's directly talking to me, so I don't want to talk to anybody else, because that is definitely a hurdle I know a lot of people have. If you can get past your own mental hurdles and just accept the Twitter writing community is just purely transactional, you can find really good beta readers. And I have been surprised as to the number of quality critique partners I have found on Twitter who are just looking for honest, straightforward, cut to the heart of the matter feedback.
So how do you find the right beta reader for you? Are there certain questions that should be asked, Leo?
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, you want a beta reader who understands and enjoys your genre. So I am a really good beta reader if you are like, not to toot my own horn, but I am a good beta reader if you're looking for, fantasy or YA or, science fiction that's very actiony. But I would not be a very good beta reader for a, multi-generational literary novel that combines aspects of spoken word poetry. Like that's just not something that I'm familiar with. I don't know that I'd have very good feedback, and a lot of things I wouldn't necessarily like or respond to just because that's not my genre. So not only that, but I feel like it is a good idea to check in with your beta reader and find out what books they like and what books they tend to read. Not to judge them, because all published work has value, but if they are a huge fan of Divergent, they might have different expectations for world building than someone who's a huge fan of Gideon the Ninth. Like those are just, even though they're in, a roughly like YA kind of fantasy sci-fi genre, they're just very different. And so having that in mind as your beta reader gives you feedback can be really helpful. And I think it's also good to gauge how much they tend to give in terms of feedback. So if you are looking for really short, snappy, like I just want someone to read it and tell me what the overall gist is, then it might stress you out if all of a sudden your beta reader is commenting on every third sentence to give you feedback on it, or vice versa. So it's good to just get a sense of like what they tend to like, what they tend to read, and what their expectation is in terms of like how much you're expecting in terms of feedback.
Yeah, my perspective is gonna sound a bit weird, but it's something I take into my work, that I think it's a bit like platonic dating, in that you first get to know the person, to know if they're right for what you want for your work. But it really depends on what you're looking for, what type of feedback you need, and your necessities at the time. So usually connecting with someone online is a good idea, or to get a taste of their tastes, to see if they really fit the feedback, the kind of feedback that you need. So yeah, just asking a lot of questions. Good Battery will not be afraid to answer any questions. And like Lio said, look for someone that's whose tastes lie in your genres.
A skeptic, what are some ideal qualities you look for in a beta reader?
There's a Greek adage that says you need to know thyself. And before I go telling other people what I want, I need to know what I want. I'm 100% okay with being dragged. Like, if my manuscript is bleeding, if it has been ripped apart physically because there's so many editing, comma here, semicolon there, word choice, word choice, word choice, word choice, grammar, POV wobble in the same sentence, yes, tell me. I would rather know now. My opinion is that grammar and syntax, that's polished. That in my opinion should go last. If you got to add it in now, add it in now. But I know I am a particularly intense critique partner. I narrow in on plot elements that don't work. I will flat out tell people if I'm lost or if there are plot elements that don't work. I know my style is a little too harsh for other people. So a question I've seen a lot, and I have incorporated myself, is on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is little bunny foo-foo, and the other is, I don't know, Diablo. How intense do you like your feedback? And I know that if someone answers a 1 to a 5, I'm probably not going to be their favorite person in the world. They may need me, in my opinion. In my opinion, those people need me the most. But I know that when it comes to beta reading, I'm not diplomatic. And you, the person looking for feedback, you need to know what you're comfortable with. If you walk away from your beta reading session and you are stressed out, like, at the end of the day, this is words on a document. I know that if someone excoriates the words on the document, that has little to say about my value as an individual. But there are other people who aren't who don't have that realization. Beta reading critique partnering is about making your manuscript better. Advice should be given in the spirit of that. Advice should be received in the spirit of that. If that has somehow been lost in the mix, some reevaluation needs to take place on someone's end. When I look for a beta reader, I'm looking for somebody. I always look for people who understand plot elements and structure and characters. That is what I look for, because that is the thing. If my characters don't make sense, my story is shot. If I've taken 17 chapters to finish Act 1, my story is shot because I'm going to lose reader interest. I want my beta readers to help me achieve my goal. And my goal is, after 100 pages, I want my reader to say, tell me how this ends. I must know this. Give it to me. And I need my beta readers to tell me if that's happening or not. And if it's not happening, tell me why it's not happening.
Yeah, I agree to an extent. It's interesting because I am a little bit more fragile, and I agree that sometimes I kind of need to just like be told the truth very directly. But I think there are different things that people might need at different parts of the process. So if someone's like just starting out, they're just trying to get to the point, like I'll read some novels where it's really clear that this is someone's first attempt at a first novel. It's like, it's very, very early in the process. And I'll generally be a little bit more gentle because I'm like, you're still working towards it. I'll be like, here's what you need to work on. And I will be firm about the fact that there is a lot of stuff here, but I am cognizant of the fact that they might not be as familiar with having their work torn apart as someone who is a writer who's been doing this a while and has kind of like developed that thicker skin. The big things I look for in a beta reader are, I want someone who like will love my book to the extent that I have made that a possibility. You know, I don't want them necessarily to like be robotic in the way that they give advice. I want there to be some emotion behind it. And I want someone who cares about my book, but understands that it's mine. It's a red flag when a beta reader is telling the writer what they should do to fix everything that they don't like about it. Like it's a red flag to me when it's one thing to say like, hey, this needs, you know, stronger character direction. And it's another thing to say, your character needs to do this. There can be suggestions. And sometimes I will, if I see a problem, I'll give like 3 or 4 possible examples of how that problem might be resolved so that the writer can see that it's like, here are some things you could try, but you can do something different. But yeah, I want someone who wants to work with me to make my story better, but also wants it to be my story and not the story that they think I should be telling.
Yeah, I think those are really great points, and they really come down to it. Ultimately, you want someone who is honest and straightforward, but for example, in my case, I am very attentive to detail when it comes to plotting characters and all those structural elements. But I'm also someone who, by nature, likes to point out people's strengths. So whenever I tend to unconsciously balance the two things when I give my feedback, in that I will very straightforwardly point out when I'm not understanding something, or when something feels a bit toned down for the impact that you're trying to get from the reader. But I will also tell you when you're absolutely blowing my mind, because I want you to know how you're achieving that kind of impact. Also, I think helps you build your story better. Yeah. So ultimately, you want someone who's very straightforward, but also can have a keen eye to understand those two differences.
So you finally finish the manuscript. You're on a motivational high and send it off to beta readers. You naturally want to see immediate feedback. But Leo, what is a reasonable time frame for beta readers to return a manuscript?
Ooh, see, that is a challenge because it depends on the book and it depends on the beta reader. If your beta reader is giving you line by line feedback on a 120K masterpiece of epic fantasy, that's going to take a lot longer than if they're just giving you like thoughts on a middle grade that's, you know, 35K. Generally speaking, you can always talk about like what kind of time frame you're expecting with your beta reader up front if you have a specific deadline that you kind of need feedback by. But I would say on average, it will take between 2 and 6 weeks, depending on the length, on the like depth. And I know this is difficult to gauge right away, but also on the quality, because a book where the reader has to go back and figure out what you were trying to say very frequently is just going to take longer to get through than a book that has been edited to a tighter standard.
I am not a professional critique partner unless, you know, I sell my services as such. The average turnaround time is 2 to 4 weeks from, in my experience. I know, again, shout out to Liz Cartwright. Hi. I've seen her turn 100,000 words around in 2 weeks. Like, she will straight up do that. You're paying for it, but she's going to do that for you. I'm working with somebody right now, and I've flat out told him that I don't know how long it's going to take me, but you will see, like, we share a document together. He sees every time I've done something. and not a week goes by where I don't add on something. And because it is an intensive work in progress, he knows this is going to take some time. Meanwhile, I had somebody who handed me like a chapter and said, hey, what's functionally wrong with this? And I got back to him a day later because my schedule opened up. This is a matter that is strictly about communication, and it goes both ways. Like, if it's my story, I need to say roughly when I want to have it back. Like, I want to have it back as soon as possible, or I'm juggling 6 other things right now. If you get back to me in 6 months, I'm still gonna be happy with you. But just keep in touch. On the other side of it, the person giving the advice needs to say if something's come up, or hey, I'm at the halfway point. Just checkpoints. That's it. Checkpoints is a very transparent system, and it keeps everybody happy. I have found that the biggest problems in beta reading and critique partnering is that people don't communicate each and every little thing. Sounds tedious? Oh, absolutely is tedious. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it's easy. Communicating is hard. For a communicative species, we are terrible at it. Like wholesale, we are terrible at something we need to be desperately good at, but it is so invaluable.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to that, to communication. It's really going to depend on both the writer and the reader, on the urgency of your manuscript. For example, if you have a manuscript that you need a turnaround of a week, just be open about it from the start, and if you both talk it out, you'll definitely work something out. And if it's not the right time for either of you, you can just part ways amicably. So just communicate your expectations from the start, and mostly I've seen turnarounds from a week to 2 months. So it really depends on the different situations.
Yeah, I think we've touched on some of this, but to kind of briefly wrap up some of our thoughts and ideas, Arena, what should writers expect from beta readers?
It's actually a question I'm really interested to hear your answers, because I think it will help me also internalize what I need to bring into my work. But from a reader's perspective, or at least what I try to do most, is to just be honest. Don't be afraid to communicate. Like Skeptic said, don't be afraid to be open about your feedback and your expectations, and a good reader will be able to do that. And also, something that I think is really important, and that I personally tend to bring into my work, but I think it's a continuous process, is to distance your feedback from your, well, better reading is always going to be a bit subjective, right? And that's somewhat what you're looking for as a writer. But I think when we're talking about structural issues such as characters and plot, you also need to be able to distance your subjectivity from your objectivity in a way. And so I think writers should expect that from a good beta reader, someone that can do a bit of both.
One thing writers should expect from anyone reviewing their work, no questions asked, keep the formatting. Under no circumstance should the person reviewing your work change your formatting unless you're doing like a suggest changes situation or track changes. Like, I know Microsoft Word does this, Google Docs does this. That's fine. I'm talking about somebody who takes your work, dumps all the italics, all the indent, all the tabbing, all the spacing, and just reviews it de novo. I'm sorry, all brand new. This has happened to me. This has happened to other people I know. There is a person who takes money to review work, then dumps your entire thing, removes the formatting, changes the font to Arial, size 11, no matter what, and then says, you're never allowed to criticize editors. No. You can criticize editors for that very function, and there is no excuse for it. So writers should expect beta readers, anyone who reviews their work, keep it the same. If you want to change something, you are suggesting a change. You are commenting on something that you think doesn't work. But if I took one of my mom's canvases and I took a black stroke to it, I would rightly be written out of her will. And I don't see why critique partnering is any different. Don't touch my stuff unless I tell you to touch my stuff. Don't touch it. Go away. No, go away. There is no rule that says you're allowed to, and you're also not allowed to hide behind the whole, well, you have to act professional about it. No, you've touched. As much as I say you need to keep a thick skin about this, there is a barrier to that. Like, advice is one thing. You have fundamentally changed my manuscript. You are wrong.
Yeah, I agree with Skeptic on the point that a beta reader should not be changing what is on the page without permission. Everything from the formatting that you've chosen to use to the word choice. They can tell you this formatting is confusing for me, or this doesn't work for me, and you can decide what to do with that. But ultimately, it's your book, it's your decision. And I think another thing that writers can expect from beta readers is that there will be communication. I feel like many writers will have an experience at some point where they send off their work to a beta reader and they just never hear anything again. And the first instinct is to be like, it was so terrible that it killed them. Like, they are gone now and they will never speak to me again because I was just that bad. But in reality, it's a fault of a beta reader, because even if you get into a manuscript and you realize, oh, this is like more than I can handle right now, that is understandable. It happens. Just communicate with the writer so that they know that it's not their fault. And then they can find someone who is able to do that for them. Another thing I think that a writer can reasonably expect from a beta reader is that they will stick to what they and the writer have agreed to, unless like the change has also been agreed upon, and that the feedback, whether it's extremely like detailed or just like, a couple pages or a page or two, that the feedback will incorporate positives and negatives. Like, there should be a level of encouragement. If there's good things in your writing, like, I think that should be, praised. But ultimately beta reading is about getting better. So if all someone's doing is saying, oh, I really like everything, that's not really going to be helpful. I know what you're thinking. What if I have written the perfect book? And there can be no critique, for it is flawless in every way. I frequently have that question myself. That's a joke, but there should be at least a sense of like, I'm not sure, like, if somebody really loves everything about the book, then they should at least be communicating that. Because if all you're hearing is, I love it and it's perfect, that's probably an indication that you're not getting the full beta reader experience.
Yeah, I think in the end, it's all about, this is a bit from both sides, but especially from the writer's side, I think, to never expect authority, because essentially beta reading is but it's market research, right? So whatever the beta reader, whatever feedback you get from a beta reader, one really important thing is to never take it as an answer, because in the end, you're the one building the story, you're the one crafting the story. So even if the feedback seems so set in stone, which I don't think it can ever be, when you're giving the feedback, don't take that as a certainty, and always be open to another perspective.
I want to add, there's a difference between advice you don't like, where it's clear that the person who reviewed your work didn't actually bother reading your work. They were just going line by line looking for grammar errors. And advice that's uncomfortable to listen to. Like, it's one thing if you tell me that I've got POV wobble, which I'm like, at this point, I'm almost expecting you to say I've got POV wobble, and if you say I don't, I'm gonna wonder what's wrong with you, because I know I do it. It's one thing if I hear an uncomfortable truth, and another of, I don't get why this character has to be a woman. What? What is that? There is a point you, the beta reader, should and I do this too. I look at the first 5 pages of anything I'm handed to, and I say, and I make a judgment right then as to whether, and this is the full subjectivity approach. I look at it and I go, can I do this or can't I? And I realize a cynical person could hear that approach and go, well, you could just refuse anything like that. Yeah, I could. I don't. You're going to hear something later where that refutes that whole cynical approach, but that's ready for later. Writers should expect at least one person they come across to say, I'm not able to do this right now. And that is, in my experience, almost never a reflection on you. And the 1 out of a million times it could be a reflection on you, don't value that person's input. Just trust me.
Right. So we've been talking about what to expect from beta readers, but anytime you're working with someone else, it's two-sided, right? So we also want to know, what should beta readers expect from writers? Skeptic, can you help with that?
I have this great relationship with this guy I just met. And I did the 5 pages thing. His requires a ton of work. He knows it. We've discussed it. I saw his work. I read his 5 pages. I sent him my first 5 pages and said, don't edit it, just read it, and tell me if this is something you'd like to read more of. And then we took to Twitter and started DMing each other, and we have a great rapport. I'm looking for specific things for my manuscript. He's looking for a lot of stuff that I'm oddly enough able to provide. Typically, I'm not. As his beta reader, I wanted to know that if I had the freedom to be like, I'm gonna say this, I'm gonna tell you have some odd word choices, a lot. Are you ready for this? And this guy, to his monumental credit, is just like, yeah, tell me what I got to hear. I think establishing that rapport early on is critical to having an understanding, because it is the key between, well, in my case, the two of us becoming bros, and there's somebody who is, I'd say, C-list celebrity in the writing community, medium fish in a small pond kind of situation, and I want nothing to do with that individual. I think they are the scum of the earth. So to summarize, communicate. What do you need? Like, it's not even it's yeah, the beta reader has to say, the writer has to say what they need. The beta reader has to tell the writer what they need. Like, I, the beta reader, need to know how much freedom I have to be strong in my criticism. Do I have to approach everything with oven mitts? Is this fragile glass, or is this an anvil that I can just chuck across the driveway? Because if it's an anvil, I can go hog wild on this thing. And if it needs to be treated gentle, I'm gonna find someone else for them, because I can't be gentle.
I'm really curious to see what you have to say about this, Arena. But for me, a big thing is communication, like Skeptic said. And when I'm providing feedback, I haven't experienced this, thankfully, but it's very important to take that feedback with respect as a writer. I have seen, I've never personally experienced it, but I have seen writers who will get very angry and very defensive if a beta reader provides feedback. And I'm like, this is what we're here to do. And, you know, we're people who have, you know, feelings just like you. And if it makes you feel bad to hear that, you know, your writing has plot issues, imagine how we feel to hear that our entire opinion is crap. Like, it's just not very nice for us. And like, it's not intended to be taken in a personal way if we have an issue. I've had stories that I love to death, but they have one or two, you know, large things that are problems that, you know, I think need to be worked on for them to become ready. I think another thing that's not rude, and I understand where it comes from, but can be kind of shooting your beta reader in the foot a little bit, is when a writer gives a lot of off the page, like, information to a beta reader. Whether it's telling the beta reader, like in notes, things that are going to happen in the story, or like trying to explain a bunch of stuff outside of the text, that can be a problem. Or like when you're coming to your beta reader, like my suggestion for a writer is, it's one thing to be like, you know, let me know if the POV is consistent. It's another thing to be like, I know the POV of this one character is crap, because when I'm going through the novel, like I might not have even noticed it, but now that you've like said it to me, I'm more primed to have that opinion when I might not have otherwise done. And I think it kind of damages the objectivity a little bit. And I will sometimes have writers who will explain to me, they're like, no, like the character's not inconsistent. What's going to happen is, like, in the future, in book 5, the character's going to find out that they're actually two people. And so the inconsistency is intentional. And I'm like, okay, but I don't know about book 5. And you're not going to be able to track down every person who reads your novel and tell them, hey, book 5 is coming. Like, you have to put it in the story now, where you might still hint at that. But if it looks like it's coming out of nowhere and there's not at least some sense that there will be an answer, that's going to be a problem. So I find that sometimes writers will try and get ahead of what they're afraid of the criticism is going to be. And you kind of can't do that, because you're not going to be able to just Facebook message every person who buys your book.
So I wanted to ask you, Lio, do you think that having that sort of meta dialogue about where your novel is going to go might be better for a critique partner than a beta reader? Because that's my intuition, is that I would rather, like, the beta reader, like we discussed earlier, is more the reader perspective, where critique partner is more the mechanical perspective. And if that critique, like the critique partner is a low level editor, like, let's not mince words here. My editor is probably going to kill me for that sentence, but okay. Like I'm here for that. All right. So, but that conversation of, this is something I have planned for a subsequent book to have the reveal there. That's a conversation you can have with maybe a critique partner. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I would agree. When you have a critique partner relationship, like, you can also gauge where that is. A critique partner is a better person also to let you know, because a critique partner, because they usually have writing experience, can give you better feedback on, like, oh yeah, that makes sense, but the setup would be more helpful if it was done this way potentially. So yeah, it's definitely, I think you can benefit from both, but with a critique partner, you are going to give a lot more, like, extra page, kind of have more dialogue with them about where the story is going and how to set that up, than you will with someone who's like just reading your book for the first time.
Yeah, picking up on that first, as a beta reader, I don't think you want to start off knowing too much about the book and the intention behind it, because essentially when you're looking for a beta reader, you want to judge the impact of your story, and giving too much of it right off the bat can sort of kill the impact that you're trying to achieve. But primarily, as a beta reader, what you should expect from your writer is just communication. It all comes down to that. Just what they expect from you. Not so much as in the type of feedback. I don't personally expect the writer to ask me to adjust my feedback, because I have a very set type of feedback. I'm naturally very straightforward, but I also have a tendency to analyze my words and try to balance honesty and softness in a way. You know, I want to be as objective as possible, but uh, not exactly. I don't want to say rude, because I think honesty and rudeness aren't that exclusive. But I don't mind my feedback according to the person I'm giving my feedback to. I'm just my feedback is intrinsic, so I don't exactly adjust it, but just communication right off the bat. That's the most important thing you should expect from a writer.
Oh, and just one quick thing. It is possible, and in fact, it's not even particularly uncommon, to beta read a portion of a novel. So if you want to test out a beta reader, it's totally fine to be like, hey, can you look at my first 3 chapters? And if you really like their feedback, you can be like, what would you think about reading the rest of the story? Now, bear in mind, there is a risk of them not being able to do that because maybe they only have time for a short amount. But that is a totally valid way to like test out for both beta readers and writers how the relationship between the two of you works.
So, Arena, how does one organize the beta reader feedback?
Yeah, I don't think there's a set answer for this, and it really depends on your working method, and it's also something that is constantly evolving. I personally like to mix my feedback. I like to do in manuscript commentary because it's more pinpointed and I can talk about the scene at hand. And usually if the writer already has questions, direct questions they want to ask me, I'll just ask them. Or otherwise, if they don't have any questions right off the bat, I just do a reader report. So I combine the manuscript with a reader report or the questions. And again, it really depends on what the writer is looking for. If they have a specific type of way they want me to give feedback, I'll adjust to what they need and what they're looking for.
I'd love to hear what challenges you've all had and how you've dealt with them. Lio, would you mind sharing?
Yeah, I would say it's a challenge to learn how to balance, critiques properly, how to respond to, how the writer is and how to gauge that relationship. Like all of those things are challenging, especially when you're first starting out. I feel like for me, the biggest challenge is when I come into a story and I feel like the writer is just not there. Because there are some stories where I feel like the problem is just a lack of like, a certain thing, or they just need to add a little something or take away a little something. But it can be really difficult when the story itself, the quality of the writing, I'm just like, you just need to read more, you need to write more, like you just need the practice, because there's certain things that I can't like beta or critique into being publishable. Like, unless I go in and write the book line by line, like I can't fix if there's a problem on a fundamental level. And I don't think, because the thing is, I don't want to discourage a writer, because almost every writer on the planet came out with that terrible first draft. Like it's just a part of the process. But I also want to be, there's so much that it's hard for me to be like, if I give feedback on everything that's not currently working, it's just going to be exhausting for both of us. So that is something that I've had challenges with. And I feel like in those scenarios, what I tend to do is to be as honest as I can be about the things that I find interesting. Because a lot of times, even in a really, really rough new writer, there is still a spark of an idea, or there is a strength that they're displaying. And I will kind of like let them know what I think that is. And I will be like, this is something that needs a lot of work, that I think just on a writing level, I think more reading and more time will really make this better. But it can be hard. It's tough to just be like, I just don't think that this is going to be ready anytime soon.
So I'm going to start my answer with, where are my neurodiverse people at? Okay. So, and I know there are people in the audience who are like, I'm ready for this answer. I'm feeling this answer. Where are you going to go with this, Skeptic? All right, here we go. I'm about to butcher someone else's words, and I don't care. There's this author. His name is Don Miguel Ruiz. He has a book called The Four Agreements. If you're neurodiverse, pick this book up, read it now. Read it tomorrow, read it a year from now. Rule 2, rule 3, and I'm going to get these backwards or the right way. I never remember. So rule 2 is to never assume. Rule 3 is to don't take anything personally. And too many people assume that last one, don't take anything personally, is bad. No, it's both ways. It's bad or good. So if I'm given advice, if someone says, if I dress up in my, because I have a nice suit. I have a nice suit. I bought it from a nice guy. I had it tailored from a specialty tailor. It looks great on me. It is perfectly cut on me. When I wear that and someone goes outside and says, "Hey, Skeptic, you look nice today," that has nothing to do with me. Them saying that I look nice is a reflection of how they feel. That is, they searched within themselves. They looked at my aesthetic and said, my aesthetic matches their idea of what an aesthetic should be for someone who looks like me, and they like that. If I look at a book, I'll take something I know I'm not going to like. So if I take a multi-generational mystery romance set in the romantic style of writing in the Edwardian era, I'm not going to like it. I'm not even going to come close to liking it. That has, by the way, shout out to an ex-girlfriend. Hi, Sarah. My not liking it has nothing to do with her. I know nothing about romanticism. I don't like the Edwardian style of writing, or the Edwardian era. I think some of the clothes are nice, but I'm not going to read a book for the outfits, which make it maybe 2 pages over the whole thing. Unless you've got like an Algernon situation going on. Shout out to Oscar Wilde. But that other one, don't take anything personally, never assume. When I have a household chore, it's called take out the trash. My take out the trash is grab the trash bag, take it to the thing. The person I live with, their definition of take out the trash is look around you, gather up clutter, put it in the trash bag, seal up the trash bag, take the trash out, come back inside, replace the trash bag. If roommate says take out the trash, and I take out the trash, and I don't do it the way she did, we're going to have an argument. And we did twice. So we're going back to this thing I said before: communicate, communicate, communicate. You're going to communicate over each and every little singular detail. You need to learn how to take the advice and understand that the advice you're given has nothing to do with you and everything to do with how that person knows how to give advice. But if you don't calibrate that person to the way you like is receiving advice, you're not going to like a single word of what they're going to say. So that book is The Four Agreements, that's F-O-U-R, by Don Miguel Ruiz. And get ready for like a crash course on Toltec philosophy. Sorry for my rant. This is my TED Talk.
No, yeah, that was an awesome TED Talk. I think it touched on a lot of important issues. For me, as a reader, one of the hardest things when I'm doing meta is to separate my personal experience from the kind of objective feedback that I'm trying to give. For example, I've got academic experience in editing and analyzing writing. So I tend to give a lot of more objective feedback in plot structure and character and all of those things. But it becomes a bit of a challenge when you're dealing with with material that is a bit more personal. For example, I had this experience with a writer that their book dealt with an LGBTQ character, and we shared an identity. And eventually I gave feedback on not the authenticity, but possible misinterpretations that might arrive from the writing, if any. And I found that during that experience, I constantly had to just check myself and realize, okay, how is this feedback, if it is becoming my personal experience and not what the author is trying to say? Because especially in this case, you can't really assume anything, like Skeptic was saying. So that's always a bit of a challenge, trying to separate. And I think as a book reviewer, you also get this a lot, trying to separate your personal experience while reading and the kind of themes and thoughts and intentions that are being written into the book by the writer.
All right, for viewers who want to become a beta reader, Skeptic, do you have any advice for those just starting?
Start small. 2 chapters, tops. See how you like it. The thing I implore you is, if you've never read a writer's manuscript before, I with tears in my eyes, please never ever say, "I'm a fast reader, I'll get this back to you." I have lost count the number of people who have told me this and then have fucked off to the ether. And by the way, that is the nicest way I can phrase it. For those of you who don't like profanity, they have fucked off. Please, if you're gonna read someone's manuscript, take a bite you can chew. It's like a buffet. Like, you go to a buffet, you're gonna take a plate, but you know you're gonna eat what's on your plate until like that 5th plate. Okay, for me, it's a 5th plate. Don't judge me. Now I can take a $120,000 fantasy masterpiece, like Leo mentioned earlier, but 5 years ago, no. As a 7th grader, I couldn't take Lord of the Rings except in bite-sized pieces. I had to take like book 1, then book 2. That, by the way, that's book 1 of Fellowship of the Rings, then book 2 of Fellowship of the Rings. Most people forget that Lord of the Rings is technically 6 books, as arranged by Tolkien. But make it easy, make it manageable for you, make it a reasonable expectation for your writer. And again, I'm going to shout out that book, Catching the Worms by Carol Beth Anderson. It literally just came out. I was an ARC reader for it. That's an advanced reader copy. I was an ARC reader for it, and magnificent. I could not say better what she has in about 200 pages. Like all things that you want to get started, it's better to research how it is done before you actually, because it's never as straightforward. Marathon joggers, I have a friend who took up marathon jogging, before COVID, and he had to watch videos on how to actually run, because you think you know how to run because we've all been in school. No, there's a right way to run. There's a right way to beta read. There's a right way to critique.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good idea to start small. It's not, in my experience, very difficult to find people who will let you beta read their stuff. If you go into pretty much any group and you're like, hey, I'm willing to beta read, you will find half a dozen people who will take you up on it very quickly, because there's a lot of people who want things read, and not necessarily as many people who have the time to read them. I do think one important thing to get settled and be ready for, and a reason that it's a good idea to kind of start small, is that beta reading, the manuscripts that you're going to look at are not the same thing as reading published works. No matter how much you might be like, like, no, I'm totally like, I read Twilight. Like, I don't like, no matter what book you want to like, you know, say is like the worst ever, those books are still published. They've been through a professional editor. They've been like, you know, even if there are things that are not necessarily as amazing as you think other writing is, they have had the advantage of time and multiple eyes on them that a beta read book just has not had. So in many cases, even with an established writer or a writer that you're like, but like they're already so good, there's going to be things that just don't make sense. I not to like call myself a fantastic writer or anything, but like I had a book that I went through a lot of different rewrites with. I like sent it off to my beta reader thinking that it was perfect, and I forgot to establish what a character looked like, which made me continually talking about how obviously they're this kind of person completely confusing. And it's important to be ready for the fact that like this is a more difficult style of reading because you don't have the benefit of an entire team who've come together to make that work, you know, make sense before you even get it in your hands.
Yeah, I think this is another topic where communication is always the first response that you should have. One thing that I'm really particular about is communication. So if you're just starting out or thinking of starting out beta reading, there's nothing better than hearing from the source, so to speak. So as we talked about before, it's fairly easy to find beta readers. So don't be afraid to reach out to people and just ask about the mechanics and just get enough information to make sure that you're comfortable with that type of work. And as soon as you start out, one thing that I believe is really important is just asking for feedback from the authors themselves. So that type of thing can really help you grow even as you're starting off. And usually writers are very available to do that. So yeah, just communication and understanding where your weaknesses lie is the only way to grow and to start.
I agree. Asking them for what do you expect? You know, especially when a beta reader is just starting, you might have your own ideas of what a beta reader should do or say or something, and the writer themselves may be just looking for something very specific, like world building or characterization or something like that. And if the beta reader goes off and says, "Oh, well, you need to do this and this and this and this is wrong," well, I know that's wrong. That's not what I'm asking you to look at. So I think it is important for that communication that you guys have emphasized over the panel. I think that's great. But yeah, well, I mean, with beta reading, you have good and bad experiences, right? So if you've had one of those experiences, good or bad, while honoring everyone's privacy, would you be willing to share a bit about it? Also, add what can beta readers or writers learn from that experience?
I have this thing that I've wanted to share, and this story makes me very mad. I'm working, so I got partnered with a guy through author mentorship. No, was it author mentorship? I think it was author mentorship match. And yeah, it was AMM. And we got paired up at random. And a matter of fact, it was actually an author I didn't pitch to, but I thought I did, and I signed up for her matching anyway. And she's like, I'm going to give you this guy because you two sound like you have similar manuscripts. Okay, fine. So Piotr, not his real name, but I do want to emphasize the fact that that name sounds foreign, and that's because this individual is. English is his third or fourth language. Has a full manuscript. Some lore-heavy piece of sci-fi that I'm picking apart. His first beta reader instructed him to, as often as possible, go to thesaurus.com and make his prose beautiful. And his second beta reader took one look at his manuscript, got 20 pages into his manuscript, and then said, "No, I can't do this," and told it, and in no nice way told him to go screw himself. I'm looking at this. I am mad. like that someone, the first person gave him bad advice, and I'm here for him because like I think I can actually help him. I'm not taking a dime of his money. I'm not asking him to pay me. He's looking at my stuff and he's like, rarely do I have like this kind of relationship with somebody, because usually if I'm putting in this much work, I want to get a little more out of it. But for whatever reason, this guy just hit me at the right time, I guess. I don't know. But every page I'm saying word choice 6, 7, 8 times, because he's got word choices that make zero sense whatsoever. He would talk about seeds that have been birthed in the womb of the world. I'm like, no, that's not the imagery you want to shoot for. And he's just talking about plants, by the way. He's not talking about something mystical happening. He was just talking about like gardening. And again, that was advice his first beta reader gave him. So here's where I'm going to take this as here's the takeaway I want to give people. If you're going to work with somebody, you owe a duty, a burden of duty to them. Like once this is after you've had the communication of what you want versus what I can provide. This is, you have invested time and effort into their manuscript. You owe a duty of care to your author to do a damn good job, or at least the best job you're capable of doing. No one's going to come after you later and suit and take you and drag you into court for this, but you're also not going to be somebody who should be reviewing other people's work. This person's existing manuscript is an absolute work in progress. See, I can be diplomatic, because that wasn't the word I wanted to go to. But I also want Piotr to respect me at the end of the day. Like, it requires a lot of work, and I don't think it would be fair to his pocketbook to send him to a professional editor who's going to tell him the same thing I'm going to tell him, and it's going to cost him hundreds of dollars to do so. There's a right way to say word choice. There is a right way to say, hey, why don't you use thesaurus.com for a different way of saying one thing, but to tell the person to dump their entire, and then he did. Like, that's the real damage you can do as a beta reader, is you can give really bad advice. You can make it blanket statement, and then the other person's going to do that, and turns out just completely bad advice. Be judicious with what you say, understand what you can do, but with all of my beta readers, I am there for them even after they're done. I did a sensitivity read for somebody who wanted a Romany perspective on a novel, and I gave them that perspective. If she needs my help, shout out to Alice. Hi, Alice. If she needs further feedback because maybe I made a mistake, I'm going to be there for her, because that is my duty to her. And with that, I get off my soapbox.
I would say I've had so many really great experiences in beta reading, and like there are sometimes that I'll read something that someone has wrote, and I can't believe that like I'm the one who gets to see this first. Like, it's very like, it can be this really like amazing experience. And it can feel really good when someone trusts you enough to share something that they've worked so hard on, knowing that like it might hurt if you don't like certain aspects of it. And I will say that even for me, I don't think I should be someone's only beta reader, because I give the best advice I can. I work very hard at making sure that I'm researching how storytelling works, the mechanics of it, not only for myself, but so that I can give good advice. But sometimes I'm wrong. I've had a writer respond to some feedback I gave with like, but that doesn't make sense. And then I'm like, oh, you're right. That was a bad piece of advice. I apologize. Like, I think it's a really good idea to have a consensus of as many people as like you can trust with the work, just so that you can start to see patterns, because there's always a chance someone's just like forgotten a detail, or you know, they just have like a blind spot that they're not acknowledging. I think one of the hardest things that ever happened to me while I was beta reading is, and it wasn't actually the author's fault necessarily, but I was reading through a manuscript that, you know, was a pretty standard like YA fantasy. And then there was a really graphic triggering scene that kind of came out of nowhere for me. And it was like one of my personal triggers. So I almost never stop in the middle of a chapter when I'm reading. Like I had to put it away, and like I couldn't function because it was that much. And I had no idea that it was going to come up, and I don't generally read stories that include these kind of things because they affect me so badly. And so I had to go to the author and be like, hey, like this subject matter is actually really triggering for me. So I don't know if I'm the right person to beta read this for you. It's really difficult. And together we kind of talked over like what would work. And I ultimately decided that as long as the like triggering passages were highlighted so that I knew where they were and I could decide when I was ready to like engage with them, then I could continue reading the work. But it's, for some beta readers, that may not be a possibility. So that was something that was like, it wasn't necessarily a bad experience because of, you know, the writer, although I think I would have appreciated having a warning, because I didn't have like a back cover, or I don't have anywhere I can go to check for it. But it was personally a really difficult experience.
Yeah, that's, I'm sorry you had to go through that, Leo. That's actually one of the reasons that I include a trigger warning, an obligatory trigger warning of part in my beta reader request form. But either I've been really lucky, but I don't think I've ever had a bad experience with an author. Essentially, my bad experiences when beta reading are with myself. I know that sounds a bit strange and a bit intense, but they're essentially about me trying to work through my experience and trying to give that honest feedback despite that. But yeah, I've mainly had really great experiences. I think I've been either really lucky, or that just speaks to the quality of the authors that we have in the community. I've had amazing authors, like Leo touched on this. Nothing feels better than when an author reaches out to you again and says, "Hey, I've got an agent. My book has been," you know, that feels amazing. And I don't know if all my good experiences stem from the fact that I always base my work in, respect for the author, no matter how bad, so to speak, I think the content is. But yeah, it feels amazing to just be a cog in the machine in this way. So only good experiences to share so far. I'm really happy about that.
Well, you all have been great. Thank you for sharing your experiences and your knowledge with the Right Hive community. But before you go, we'd love for you to share any of your published works with the viewers. So feel free to kind of tell us about maybe what you've just published, what you're working on, if you have any books or anything, maybe your links, Arena, for you. So whatever you want to share with the community.
Yeah, I can start us off by saying that I don't have any published works. I'm not a writer, but all my published words, so to speak, can be found on my blogs and on Twitter. I'm at Voyager Arena, so feel free to reach out and connect because I post everything there. And I blog at my own personal blog, The Bookworm's Guide to the Galaxy, which is a bit of a mouthful. And also I'm at Queen's Asylum at starleafbook.com. And you can also find me at the Nerd Daily and Lesbury. So yeah, reach out and connect. I'd be happy to.
You can reach me on Twitter at V Screaming. That's the letter V Screaming after the I offer communication lessons, and I currently do the summary for Word Nerd Cafe here at Right Hive. And I'm working on a manuscript that's kind of like Heaven as an intelligence agency. And really, every time you ask me to elaborate, I go on 10-minute tangents. So we're going to leave it there.
I do have some published works, but that was a different me, and I no longer claim them. No, I have had some like short story and anthologies, but I'm actually most excited about the thing that I'm currently working on. I mostly do scripts, and I've actually recently done a supernatural drama pilot that won a runner-up for the Script Angel Scholarship Competition, which I'm pretty proud of. And I'm currently working on an adult fantasy, sort of a fairy tale Gideon the Ninth, with a lot of gay sass and kicking ass. So if you'd like to get updates on how that's going, or just hear more of the words that I think are funny, you can find me at Gay as a Lark on Twitter, or it's like you can find if you search. I know you'll be shocked to find out I'm a lesbian.
All right. Well, I appreciate you all coming today, and I think that's a wrap.